Greece heads for early elections, stoking financial concerns is what the headlines are reading as 2014 draws to a close, to the dismay of the troika of lenders. And that's also the inclusive party, the IMF. Where would that lead the debt payback and the troika's austerity measures if a new government like Syriza comes into power, who are anti-EU against the terms that are set by the troika? However, they're not against exiting the EU. Is the Eurozone in danger again? IMF has already suspended aid until after the elections. Just some of the topics that we'll be asking our guests in this edition of the debate.
The political deadlock in Greece sends shockwaves throughout Europe. European shares have tumbled after the Greek parliament rejected the government's presidential candidate. Stocks in Athens also plunged more than 11% at one point. The rejection of the government's presidential candidate has set the stage for snap elections in Greece, scheduled to be held on January the 25th. Opinion polls show the left-wing Syriza party will have a lead.
With the will of our people, in a few days, the memorandums of austerity will be a thing of the past. The future has already begun. Be optimistic and happy.
The opposition today forced elections against the will of the Greek people. Elections during the worst possible timing for the country's economy. With the basis of opinion polls, they believe to have a lead in these elections. They are making a mistake.
Syriza's possible win has rung the alarm in Europe and also in Western financial institutions. They do not want Syriza to win the elections, as the anti-austerity party has pledged to renegotiate Greece's bailout deal with international creditors. The EU's Economic Affairs Commissioner, Pierre Moscovici, has called on Greek voters to back economic reforms. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, has also suspended aid to Greece ahead of new elections in the country. Germany, Europe's strongest economy, also says Greece must stick to economic reforms, including strict austerity measures, regardless of the results of the snap elections due next month. Berlin says the reforms are bearing fruit and they have no alternative. Many people in Greece blame Germany for their economic hardships. The European country has been going through its worst economic downturn since World War II. Nearly 2.5 million people in Greece are living below the poverty line as a result of the crisis.
There's no hope. This is what I believe personally. I have no hope. Whatever happens in the election, we are indebted for the next 50 years.
Every month I'm going to collect my pension and the government reduce it. They've turned a nation that used to be smiling to one full of sorrow. They should go away.
The economic hardship in Greece and in some other European nations plunged the Eurozone into recession, from which the bloc is still struggling to recover.
Our guest for this edition of the debate, investigative journalist Tony Gosling, joins us from Bristol. We have a columnist at The Hill, Brent Budowsky, who joins us from Washington. Gentlemen, welcome. Tony Gosling, let me start with you. The headlines are pretty alarming. Snap election risks Greek lifeline. Nation stocks and bonds plunge on government defeat. The resurgence of the Eurozone debt crisis, the euro in trouble. Is it a fact where people are jumping the gun here, or is this what is going to happen to Greece and in turn the Eurozone? Can you break this down for us?
Well, it's strange, isn't it, where every election in Greece turns into a financial crisis for the markets. I think what we're seeing really is the kind of front wave of resistance now to the disastrous austerity policies which have been rolling out across Europe. I think many countries are thinking, thank God I'm nothing to do with the poison chalice of the euro. Many people thought it was going to actually help them to join it, and now it's coming back to bite them. So it's, a poison chalice, I think, is what it's come. And also, as it comes along to another election, we start to think about, and it starts to become quite clear, the question is, who is running things? You were just there talking about the Germans saying that the austerity measures are bearing fruit. Well, that's not the way that the Greek people see it. They're having all sorts of problems. There's starvation happening in Greece now. Also, people finding it impossible to get medicines that they need to stay alive. And I don't think that that kind of comment comes very well coming from the Germans, who, by the way, the Greeks forgave a vast amount of debt after World War II. So I think it's about time it happened the other way around.
Really? That's what a lot of people are saying. Brent Budowsky, what has 6 years of a bailout brought for Greece? Our guest there, Tony Gosling, just talked about some of it.
Well, I actually agree with most of what he just said. What it's brought to Greece is that the unemployment rate is now over 25%. Household income for the people of Greece is down more than 30%. When people lose a third of their income, that is a total human and economic disaster. And when an economic policy forces that, that economic policy is stupid. That I've opposed austerity in the United States, in Europe, or anywhere. I just think when you have a cruel economy where people are hurting, cutting back even more just makes it even worse. Yes, in some ways there need to be reforms. That is true. But frankly, there need to be reforms in the way big banks conduct themselves as well. And I don't see the International Monetary Fund pushing for that. They should, but they won't. So I think that austerity, wherever it happens in the slow economy, is exactly the wrong policy. It's going in the opposite direction to where it should. We cannot impose pain and cruelty and punishment on the middle class and the poor and the economy as a whole and think things will get better. All it does is it plunges Europe deeper into a recession. The European Central Bank should have been much quicker and should be much quicker today to loosen the money supply. I disagree with the International Monetary Fund taking this moment to cut back in Greece. That's going to have the opposite political effect. What I expect to happen is I do believe that the more liberal parties will win. There will have to be a coalition government that will include more moderate and centrist parties. No one's going to get a total majority in Greece. And there will be a turn away from the extreme austerity to something much more moderate and much more reasonable. But we cannot continue with 25% unemployment and with household income going down by 30% and with people being hungry and with students being punished and education being cut and health care being in trouble. We cannot continue and do more of that. It is wrong. It's a moral and human disaster. It is economically stupid to do that.
I'm still having a hard time understanding after 6 years, Tony Gosling, how those sectors that have been so affected have not improved or at least have a game plan that you see maybe the light at the end of the tunnel there. But aside from that, Brent Budowsky talked about the IMF. Yes, they have said that they have suspended their financial aid to Greece until a new government is formed. Isn't that a little premature to do that at this point, or is that something that doesn't surprise you?
Well, it just shows you who's in charge. This is the question that these elections now in Europe are starting. Isn't it wonderful in a way that the home of democracy, Greece, is where the people start to fight back against the troika? Who is the troika? The troika is three totally unelected organisations: the European Central Bank, the European Commission, who are effectively the cabinet that runs Europe, none of whom have been directly elected. These people are all nominees, and the IMF, the same exact thing. And I think what we're looking at here is the fight back of democracy right across Europe through the Syriza party. And the Syriza party are taking a very sensible. It's taken maybe a few years for the left to get its act together, but it's certainly done that with Syriza. And they're threatening now, not straight away, they're saying, look, let's come to a deal or we will have the drachma back. And that is saying that we think that the currency and the way it's organised is actually an absolutely integral part of Greek sovereignty. And that's what this election will be about. Who is really running Greece? Because what's happening in Europe over the last 30 or 40 years is that really the bankers have taken a far, far bigger role than the politicians in deciding on policy, because the politicians have had to go cap in hand to the bankers to say, well, what should we do in order to win your favour? So this is the real problem, ultimately, is that there are other forces behind the scenes who have completely different ways of looking at Greece than the ordinary people do. They just see it as a place that they want to get as much labour, get as many people out, and it's the kind of law of the jungle that the banks have been imposing right across Europe. For example, the Bilderberg conferences, which I study and I've looked at, these are very powerful in Europe, and they're very secretive conferences. They have under Chatham House rules, so even the media, the top media bosses that go along, have to swear oaths of secrecy when they go into these meetings that they won't talk about what's happened inside. These Bilderberg conferences do control most of the money in the Western world, and the politicians are having to go cap in hand to these people, as George Osborne did and Ed Balls here in Britain at the Bilderberg conference last year, here in Watford in England, really to get their policies and their ideas from the money men. And it's great to see that Syriza have now come together with a pretty good policy, it seems to me, to fight back against this imposition. Actually, what they're doing, these bankers, the Bilderbergers and the European Central Bank, the IMF, the European Commission together, is imposing policy. And that's not democracy, is it? I don't think anyone would say it is.
I'm hoping that we're going to have some time to talk about the Bilderberg Group and what they have in mind for Europe, at least. We'll try to get to that, but let's get to some points about Greece here. Brent Budowsky, what's going to happen if Syriza, let's say, wins? I mean, we know that they're against the austerity measures, and we know that it is said that they're against the outside aid. Not too sure if that's the case. Perhaps you can tell us. But they still don't want to exit the euro. Tell us what they're all about, and what would happen if they actually took over?
Well, my guess is that what would happen is they win a plurality, more votes than anybody else. They then have to form a coalition with other parties. It will be a move towards the more progressive and enlightened point of view, which I think is good. I think there could be and should be some rescheduling of loans from some of the banks. There could be some of the loans from the banks could be written off. Not all of them, but some of them. And that's one of the points that Syriza wants. I think they're right about that. Look, we just went through a bailout in the United States and European banks made out like bandits. And it was outrageous. They want all the profits, the banks, when they succeed in their trades. When they don't succeed in their trades, they want bailouts where the taxpayers are the ones that pay for their losses. I just wrote a column about Pope Francis at thehill.com. Ready for Pope Francis was my Christmas column. Thomas Piketty, the French economist, wrote about capital in the 21st century. There is a profound injustice in the world economy. It is playing out in country after country and continent after continent, now in Greece. So I think it could be healthy in the end. If Syriza wins a plurality, if they moderate and move away from some of these policies, I want Europe to survive. But I don't want Europe to be dictated to by banks or by Germany or any other country for that matter. We have to have an economy that is both rational and humane. And the result of the election, I believe, will more likely be to turn Greece away from the radical and extreme austerity towards something a little more moderate. They won't get their entire platform enacted into law, but I do think they'll move it in a more humane and decent way, pull back from some of the more extreme austerity, and build a social contract that includes everyone, not just the wealthy, not just the bankers.
I think IMF and the troika would have done that already, or would have agreed to it. But Tony Gosling against Syriza, well, this is what it says that they're not going to do. They're not going to pay the debt Greece owes to European countries. Also, they are going to increase salaries, pensions, and the number of civil servants. Obviously, all the things that the IMF and the troika have dictated the current government not to do or to do. So, if this happens, what would the troika do? What's going to happen?
Well, the consequences could be enormous, couldn't they? To have the beginning of the idea that maybe these debts won't be paid, that could have a shockwave effect right across the world economy. And of course, what's been happening in Greece, as we were hearing, tremendous amount of unemployment down, but what's happening is the quality of the work that people are getting as a result isn't paying the bills. So it's no good, is it? It's actually useless for ordinary people. Across the world, we've seen the Japanese starting to embrace quantitative easing. Just as the Americans switch the tap off, magically the Japanese start turning it on, and it's not doing their economy any good. Of course, they're now starting to have problems in Japan as well. Then we've got the Ukrainian situation and the Russian economy tanking due to sanctions and also due to the price of oil, which I think is actually a deliberate policy of the West to make Russia hurt. But what's happening is that is now also hurting the West. There seems to be a quite punitive, nasty approach by the Western policymakers towards Russia, which is also making it more difficult for countries like Greece to have a successful economy where they can repay these debts. So in a way, what's happening is that the whole situation with Ukraine and Russia is kind of forcing the issue and saying, well, actually, at some point, somebody is not going to pay their debts. It looks like because Greece is quite a switched-on country where people probably will go, not for, as our friend said, the majority Syriza party, but that they will be a powerful force in the new coalition in January. That this could have an effect right across the world. A country starts saying, well, actually, and policymakers saying, well, we don't need to pay these debts because ultimately these debts need to be forgiven and forgotten, and we need to start again because we need to have a financial system, a new financial system, which we may see next year, who knows how this is going to go, where that financial system serves the people. The money is there simply as a means to exchange to oil the wheels of the economy, rather than a noose around the neck of the world. This debt is almost like an anaconda slowly squeezing the world and actually letting less economic activity take place in the real economy, because the only people that are really benefiting from the QE and from these bailouts are the casino economy people, that is to say stocks and shares, and those are what we could see sliding if Greece says, ultimately, you asked me the question at the beginning, what could well happen here is we see sliding prices in stocks and shares right across the world, and also in asset prices and things like buildings, land, that kind of thing, could go right down across the world. It might not necessarily be just in Greece where the economy starts hurting in the casino economy. So there needs to be a plan, and we need to make sure, obviously, that the Bank of England, the Bank for International Settlements, and other powerful institutions have a plan for their economy to help the people, so that those financial systems, as I said, are actually serving ordinary people rather than those who benefit from the interest payments.
Well, the plan that I see that comes from the most powerful institution in Europe, Brent Budowsky, if you agree, is from the ECB, the European Central Bank. And of course, what they call the all-too-powerful Mario Draghi, who since 2012 has pumped, what, 2 trillion euros into the system. And I can't forget the Q&A that he was involved in which when asked about this money, he said, this money is not meant for the people, it's meant for the banks. I don't know if you remember that. So what does that mean exactly if it's not meant for the people? And in turn, why is the Eurozone really, I mean, here we are, 2014 coming to an end. They had to stoop so low and to introduce negative interest rates. Why is the Eurozone not coming out of its recession?
Well, first of all, the money should be for the people. When anyone says that on the bankers' side, they're wrong. It should be for the people. We want democratic government, and democratic government means a government for the people, not for the banks, not for the politicians, and not for the banks working with the politicians. The European Central Bank has been too slow, too long, from 2008 right into today. The International Monetary Fund. This is the worst time for the International Monetary Fund to play politics and try to pressure the people of Greece by cutting back. It's going to have the exact opposite effect. What bankers and politicians need to understand, and I say this as a progressive who believes in Pope Francis and Occupy Wall Street and the Kennedys and those values, we don't want populism to be taken over by racists, by anti-immigrants, by the radical right. And if the banks keep this up, and the left and the progressives do not respond, that's what's going to happen. And that would be a humongous tragedy for the world. So I think what's happening in Greece has the potential, by the reasonable left taking a stand in line with the people. I think it could be positive and it could be constructive. I think there have to be compromises. But the compromises can't just be who hurts the people the most, who helps the banks the most. It has to help the people. It has to be monetary policy and loan policy for the people. They don't exist for themselves. They exist for the people. The people are getting angry, and the people are speaking back, and I think that's good.
Well, then, could Syriza be that solution here to perhaps create that fine balance, Tony Gosling, or not? Or is the troika really that severe in what they want? It's their way or the highway for Greece?
Well, put it this way. Back in the 1970s, the Prime Minister, Labour Prime Minister here in Britain, Harold Wilson, he took on the City of London. They were telling him the similar kind of things that the IMF in those days, just on its own, the same sort of things that the troika is telling Greece now, which is, you know, you've got to impose austerity, this kind of stuff. And he called their bluff. He called a snap election, and he said, well, actually, no, he threatened to call a snap election, and he said, well, I'm going to call an election just on the fact of who runs this country. Is it the government, that is to say the elected government, or is it the Bank of England and the IMF? And they backed down, so he called their bluff very successfully there. I think the politicians have got to steel themselves for this battle because the banks are incredibly powerful, and also we know, for example, in Greece they are aligned with some of the big telecom companies. Vodafone in Greece were caught spying on Greek politicians back in the late 1990s, early noughties. So, you know, they have got to be really careful about making sure that when they're going for broke, that is to say they're making these doing deals with the troika, that they're absolutely focused on making those banks into utilities. That's what they should be, just like an electricity utility, whatever. They should be there to serve the interests of ordinary people. They've gone way above their pay grade, and they're starting to think they run the world and own things. They don't. They are there just simply to serve the people, and I think possibly Greece is the best stage for this battle, as it is a battle to play out, where the people actually start getting the banks back in line again, and some of this ridiculous unpayable debt gets thrown in the dustbin where it belongs.
Okay, we got less than a minute and a half here. 30 seconds to you, Brent Budowsky. Are we going to see the people for once getting what they deserve, or more of the same with these snap elections happening in Greece?
I think Syriza will win a plurality. I think the people will have a victory. I think there will have to be compromises in a coalition government after the election, but the people will be much better off if this protest against austerity succeeds, and I believe it more likely will, and that's good.
Tony Gosling, same question to you. 30 seconds, please.
Yes, I think this is going to be actually a really interesting. I'm going to be following it very closely, the result that night. I might even stay up all night to watch it because I think people all over Europe are looking to Greece now to make a precedent in putting the troika back in the box and starting to tell the bankers where to come from. Because ultimately, unless we do that, we are going to see more and more of the pain that woman we were interviewing at the start talked about right across Europe. And something needs to be done, because all these bailouts have done so far is just kick the can down the road. Now it's payback time.
Exactly. And before I let you go, Tony Gosling, is it true that Mario Draghi is going to run for the Italian presidency, or is that just a rumor?
Well, as far as I know, it's only a rumor, but it wouldn't surprise me, and I don't think he'd do all that well, because I'm afraid the reputation of bankers across the continent of Europe now is rock bottom. I can't imagine it getting any worse than it is. Anyway, I'm not sure. I don't have any inside information about that, but I think if he does, I don't think he's going to have a cat in hell's chance.
I had to squeeze that in. Not that his report card for the Eurozone is that great. Thank you very much, investigative journalist Tony Gosling there from Bristol, and thank you, Brent Budowsky, columnist at The Hill, who spoke to us from Washington. Thanks for tuning in to another edition of The Debate. From me, Kaveh Tafway, and the entire team in the capital, Tehran. It's goodbye.